Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing another wrap-up video, and it's crazy because I feel like I just did a wrap-up video, but apparently I didn't because I have so many books to share with you guys in this video, so this may be a little bit of a long one. So definitely watch this if you have some time on your hands. Maybe grab some popcorn, some wine, some tea, whatever it is that you want, because I have a feeling this might be a little bit more of a longer wrap-up because I didn't realize that I hadn't done a wrap-up in so long. So I'm sorry in advance. So we're just gonna go ahead and just jump right in. I don't wanna make a long intro because it's just not necessary. So we're gonna start with the first book. So I actually read a few books at the end of last year that I never got around to wrapping up at the end of the year. So we're gonna start off with those books first. And the first book that I actually read after my last wrap up was Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. So as you guys know, I discovered Colleen Hoover last year and I read a ton of her books. And this was the most recent one that I read from her. So I gave this book 4 stars. Now, I am not somebody that gets really super emotional when it comes to books. It's just not really how I am. It's not my personality. And usually books don't really affect me when I'm not reading them. Like, I can read a horror book and then I don't have nightmares, right? I can watch horror movies and not have nightmares. Reading doesn't affect my outside life really necessarily. But this book really surprised me because when I was reading this book, I was having a lot of dreams about this scenario, and I could tell that this book was really affecting me outside of reading it, which is so rare, and I thought it was so interesting. So this book is basically about a woman who has a daughter. She had this daughter when she was very young. Her and her husband, they met when they were like in high school, and she got pregnant in high school. And what ends up happening is there's an accident, and a very tragic accident where her husband passes away. And there's a lot more to the story, and I don't want to like spoil it or anything, but there's a lot more to the story. But it's kind of like their grieving process and the mom's grieving process, the daughter's grieving process, how they're different. It's a very like heart-wrenching, real, raw, hard-hitting read. And I think what really affected me about this book was the death of the husband. I think it really put me in this place of like being able to really comprehend and think about what it would be like to actually lose your husband and like what kind of place that would put you in and what the grieving process would be like. And I started having dreams about like people losing their husbands or losing their spouses. I kept having like death dreams, which death dreams are not fun to have, and I kept having them while I was reading this book, and I feel like this book is kind of what caused them, which I think is really interesting. But one thing that I can say about this book is it is pretty depressing. So if you want a book that's very hard-hitting, that kind of like really pulls at your heartstrings, like this is depressing. Like there's elements of this book where you're like, oh my god, like how do you cope with this? Like, it's just a lot, and I was trying to just put myself in the main character's shoes throughout this whole story, and I'm like, this would be so hard to deal with. Like, this would be so hard to deal with. Like, how would you process this? And I really loved the relationship between her and her daughter. It kind of shows like hardships that you and your child would go through in a situation like this, and how like it could feel very strained. How as a mother, like you're trying to grieve your husband while still trying to be a mom, but it's like really hard. And I really just loved how it wrapped up and stuff like that. So if you're looking for something that is going to pull your heartstrings and that will affect you, I would definitely recommend this. If you're not a Colleen Hoover person, totally get it. You might want to skip it, but I did enjoy this. I did feel like it was a little long at times, a little winded. I didn't feel like it needed to be quite as long as it was, but I do feel like it's an overall good story, and it's very raw and very real, which I feel like Colleen Hoover's pretty good at. So the next book that I read was the second book in the Marionette series, and the Marionette series is by Katie Wismer. She was a booktuber. Now she's kind of more of like an author tuber, but I've been watching her for a long time, and I'd never read one of her books before. Actually, I take that back. I read one of her poetry books, but I never read one of her like fiction novels that she's written until the Marionettes. And I actually talked about the Marionettes in my last wrap-up video, and I was talking about how good it was, and I have to say, like, the second book was just as good. It is a very fun, easy to read, new adult kind of like romance with witches and with vampires. I don't want to give away like the plot to the second one, but it's really good and it's really fun and entertaining. Like I said, if you're into like the Vampire Diaries, if you really liked like Vampire Academy, it's very like urban, modern witches and vampires in like a school setting, then I think that you're really gonna like this series because it's fun and it's fast-paced, and There's some romance in it, especially in the second book, and it was just really entertaining. Like, I really am enjoying these books, and she's coming out with the next one, I think, later this year. I think it's going to be a 4-book series. I'm not 100% sure, but I think she mentioned 4 books in the series. So yeah, the next one comes out in November of this year. I'm really excited to read it. It's just a good series. Highly recommend. I think I gave it 4 stars. So the next book that I picked up was The Dollhouse Family. This was a graphic novel that I picked up at the end of the year because I wanted to get to my 60-book goal, and this graphic novel is what did it for me. And this was okay. This is a horror graphic novel, and it is the Joe Hill comics, which Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. Now, this was an interesting read. It definitely has horror vibes. It's about this like dollhouse that's passed down from generation to generation, and there's these little dolls in this dollhouse, and it basically like sucks the little kid who owns the dollhouse into the dollhouse, and they try to get the kid to move into the dollhouse, to basically abandon their real life and their real family and move into the dollhouse and be part of the dollhouse family. And it's kind of creepy, like, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm not gonna say that this was like over the top creepy. I kind of felt like I was a little bit let down on the creepy factor. There were definitely elements to it that was kind of creepy, but I just didn't get that really strong, like, pow moment. It was very like slow to build, and it kind of was like a really nice slow hill and then kind of down. There was never like that pow moment for me with this, and so I gave this 3 stars. It wasn't horrible, but it definitely wasn't like the best graphic novel I've ever read. One thing that I can say though is the pictures in here are really, really scary. Now, not necessarily the art. This is kind of the art. It's kind of like old school graphic novel, but they have like photography pictures in here, and you can tell like somebody took pictures and then maybe like edited them on like Photoshop or something to make them really, really creepy. But this is kind of like the vibes, okay? Is that not the most terrifying thing you've ever seen? Like, what is that? What is that? I don't know. So yeah. This was okay, not the best, not the worst. Okay, so the next book that I read last year was Harrison Bergeron. This is by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. And this is a very, very short story, and I actually wanted to read this because I heard about it somewhere. I cannot remember where I heard about this book, but the second somebody like explained it to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to read that. So this is basically a really short story about, you can read this online, by the way, you just look it up and you can find it. It's really, really a short story, but basically it's about this world where they're trying to make everything equal, have all equal opportunity to the point where everybody is living equal. So if you do have a talent or you do have a gift, they will find a way to bring you down to be equal with other people. So basically what they're doing is making everybody equal to the lowest common denominator, because it's easier to bring people down than to lift the lowest common denominator up. So that's kind of like the basis of the story. So like ballet dancers, if you are a really good ballet dancer, you have to wear weights on your ankles. Or if you have a high IQ, you have to wear an earpiece that like blasts noises into your ear like every 5 minutes or so to kind of like distract your thoughts, because they don't want people with a really high IQ to be better than the people with a lower IQ, so they're always bringing people down. I think it's just a really interesting and exaggerated look into something that maybe society could see kind of trickle in, even if it's just a little bit. And I think it's a really fun thing to kind of ponder on and think about a little bit. So if you kind of want something that's a little bit thought-provoking, I highly recommend this because it's kind of a fun, unique read. I think I gave this 4 stars. Yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Go into it knowing that it's exaggerated. Like, it's definitely kind of like pushing one narrative, which is not always my favorite thing, but it is pretty short to read and it's just kind of fun to think about. I read Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey, and I don't want to talk about this too much because I feel like I've talked about this book. I just don't know when. But this book was so cute. If you like Tessa Bailey, you have to pick this one up. It is so adorable. It is Grumpy Sunshine, and the Sunshine is the male love interest, and the Grump is kind of the main character. And I have come to realize, which I'm going to talk about again later in this video, is I love like friends to lovers, or like when the love interest is really happy and nice and happy-go-lucky and sweet. I love a love interest like that, and I feel like we get a lot of hate to love, a lot of enemies to lovers, and I can appreciate that sometimes, but I feel like it's more rare to get like a really just like nice, genuinely sweet love interest, and this definitely had that vibe. And it was such a nice change. Like, I really, really liked it. And this is a book definitely to read around Christmas time because I feel like it's going to make you kind of happy, and it's just sweet. And I really, really like a good like sweet romance that's just cute, and this definitely gave me those cute vibes. It's basically just about this guy who is like the top, you know, CEO of this really famous clothing company, kind of like a Macy's or something. And there's this girl who got out of prison. She's our main character. She was in prison for like for years, and she loves window dressing. Like, she thinks window dressing is like the coolest, most interesting like thing in the world, and she's always been very interested in it. She always has really liked it. And she's looking at this window one day at this store, and the main love interest comes up, and he's like asking her about the window, and he's like, what do you think about this? And she's like, it sucks. And he's like, okay. And he offers her a job to be the window dresser, and it's like this big deal for her because it's always what she wanted to do. And obviously in the process they end up falling in love, and it's really adorable, and I loved it. I know there's some mixed reviews on this book, but I just thought it was really cute. If you're looking for something that's like just to make you feel good and just to make you happy, this is going to be it, because that's pretty much all it is. I ended up giving that one 5 stars, but I'm a fan of Tessa Bailey in general, like I've said in the past, so I do tend to enjoy a lot of her books, but this one I just thought was absolutely adorable, and I loved it. The next one I read was The Memory Police. I'm not going to talk about this one. This is by Yoko Ogawa. I talked about this in my wrap-up. It was like my end of the year stats and wrap-up video. Worst book of the year, I gave this book 1 star. I hated this book. It irritated the crap out of me. There was literally no plot. So slow. If you guys want to like know more about this, you can definitely watch that video because I talk a little bit about it. I think I talked about this book a couple of times now. Worst books of the year, it was also in that video as well. So I talk a lot into detail about it there, but yeah, I gave it 1 star. Don't recommend. If you like plot-driven books, don't read this one because it's definitely not plot-driven at all. There's really no plot. It's more of like a character study and just kind of like an exploration type of book, but not really for me, you know? Okay, so the next book that I read was Whispers and the Roars. So this was the first book that I read in 2022. This book was so good. I was pleasantly surprised with this book. Now I have to say though, before going into this book, there might be some trigger warnings here. So this book is a lot darker, and I wasn't quite prepared for how dark it was, but I think it's categorized as like a dark romance, which I have some thoughts on that. I could talk about this book actually for a long time because I feel like this shouldn't really be a romance. Like, I feel like the concept of this book was really good, but I didn't feel like it needed to be a romance. It just felt very odd that that was the choice for this book because the concept was so good without that like really intense romance, and I kind of felt like the romance kind of took away from the actual book, which is very rare for me to say because I love romance and I want romance in everything, but this is like one of those like really random books where I'm like, yeah, this could have had like a little romance. A little romance would have been like fine, but it shouldn't have like overtaken the story like it did. It just didn't need it, you know? But this book is really, really interesting. Now, one thing that I don't want to say this because it's going to give it away. What I'll say, I don't know. Okay, hold on. I'm trying to figure out how to review this. So I feel like you need to go into this book completely blind because this is one of those books where you just don't really want to know a lot going in. So don't like read too much about this book before reading it. Just know that it's dark. And the thing about this book is I actually predicted the twist really early on at about 30%. I would say the twist kind of comes at around like 60%. And I was actually kind of upset that I predicted it because I was like, man, this book would have been so much cooler if I wouldn't have predicted it, because I think if you weren't predicting it, like the twist would have been like extremely shocking, but I saw what was happening really early on, and I think it's just the things that I'm interested in and stuff and the things that I do research on. But I did see the twist and I was like, god dang it, like I wish I didn't know the twist. I wish I didn't predict it. And you guys probably know that feeling where you're mad at yourself for predicting something because you wanted it to be a surprise. But I think actually one of the reasons why I ended up liking this book as much as I did, I gave this book 5 stars, was because I predicted it. And I could kind of see it building up, and I think if I wouldn't have predicted the twist, I think this book would have had a lull moment in the middle where I would have been like, okay, like what's happening? Like, let's get to the point already, you know what I mean? And I think because I predicted it, I never had that lull phase because I could kind of like see how things were getting pieced together for the twist, so it made it really interesting. So now one thing that I can say is there are very dark moments in this book. Like, there were things about this book that irked me, and even though I gave it 5 stars, I almost gave it 4 because there were moments in this book that I was just like, oh, that just makes me really uncomfortable. Because they were talking a lot about like essay, you know, to a child, like abuse in that nature to a child. And they would go from like that scene that was pretty detailed and it was like very like, ugh, like this is a lot, directly to like a romance scene that was also very like supposed to be steamy, and going from that to that was extremely jarring, and I was like, oh my god, like I don't like this. It's like a weird combination of the two things, like too close together. And I think that that's why I didn't like the fact that this book was a romance and it was supposed to be a romance. Like, this didn't need to be a romance. Like, we could have definitely had some more fade to black scenes and I would have been totally fine. So that was the only thing that really irked me about this book, was the forcefulness of the romance that did not need to be there. But that's the point of this. I think she wanted it to be a dark romance, but it just didn't work for me in that regard. But I still give it 5 stars because I thought this book was really good. Now, I want to say, if you don't want any spoilers, okay, jump over this next part, because I just want to say this just so you guys know, because some people might be sensitive to this. So there's a lot of discussion on mental illness in this book, and some people might see this done in a bad way, and some people may not. So you might land in one of those two boats. I personally thought it was a pretty good depiction of mental illness, and I actually thought it was pretty well done. You could tell she did a lot of research on it. But just know going in, this book is dark, but it's really well done, I think. And sometimes I feel bad like saying like, this book is 5 stars, like even though it's really dark and disturbing. It just kind of feels weird that I'm like, it's so good, but like also really like dark. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear some of your guys' thoughts on it and like what you guys think about it. I think this would be a really good book for like a book club as well, maybe. Depends on what kind of book club that you're in. And also know that you may heavily disagree with me on my review or my thoughts on it, because I could see how some people would maybe consider it problematic. Let me know your thoughts if you've read this. Okay, so the next book was a book that I gave 2 stars. The Queen of Hearts by Colleen Oakes. So this book, this is the cover. I picked it up because I thought the cover was gorgeous, and it's Alice in Wonderland. I love Alice in Wonderland. I've always been a fan of it. But this book is just not that good, to be honest. There was not a plot to this really at all, and there wasn't a resolution. Like, there was not a plot and not a resolution. Like, I feel like the whole entire time I was kind of waiting for like something, and nothing really came about, like maybe this very loose, light plot, but then like the end, there was no resolution. It was like all hinged upon reading the second book. Like everything about this book was hinged on reading the next book. And I hate that. Like I like a little bit of like wrap up, you know, like something to make you feel satisfied after reading, but this didn't have anything. The characters were kind of irritating. It's basically about Dinah, who is the Queen of Hearts, and she is set to rule Wonderland after her dad dies. And her dad hates her. He thinks that she's just like this horrible daughter. He's like never loved her. She's not pretty enough to be like the Queen of Wonderland, and he's never liked her. And she's always been trying to win his love ever since she was a little girl. So the king, her dad, actually had an affair with some girl in the village, and he ends up finding his daughter that he had with this woman in the village, and he brings her into the palace. And this girl is kind of meant to be Alice, I think, and she's like this perfect blonde beautiful girl that's just perfect in every way, and he obviously loves her more than he loves Dinah. And so Dinah's like trying to win her dad's love through this whole book. But this character was so cringy to me because she was so clueless and naive. She has a friend in this book who she grew up with, right? And he was like her best friend as a child, and she loves him, right? She wants to marry him once she becomes the queen. She wants him to be next to her on her throne and rule the kingdom with her, and she really loves him. She's fallen in love with him over the years. But the cringy thing is like, it was obvious that he didn't feel the same. Like, they kissed, but he like didn't act like he liked it. He was like, okay. And she like loved him still, but like she was so clueless to the fact that he did not feel the same to her. And it just was like cringy and just kind of like, ugh, like painful to read. I feel like through the whole book, like she was just very naive and very innocent, and she would cry over everything, and I don't know, just not a great book. Wasn't a huge fan of it. No plot really. I definitely wouldn't recommend this. I'm sure there's many, many, many more like good Alice in Wonderland retellings out there. The only thing I did find interesting about this book was the way that she took characters from the real Alice in Wonderland and how she incorporated them into this book. So in this book, this takes place in the past, so you know, back in history when people didn't understand like autism and things like that. And her brother was actually the Mad Hatter, so he was older than her, and he was, I think, autistic is kind of how they're explaining it in the book. And because he was autistic, he couldn't like rule the kingdom, and he had a hyperfixation on, you know, hats, and he loved like creating hats, and nobody ever visited the Mad Hatter. Nobody ever wanted to because he was just mad. He was crazy. Like, that's how they depicted him when he was just autistic, and he just had a very, very like hyper fixation on hats. But nobody really cared about the Mad Hatter, but everyone wanted his hats because his hats were just so amazing. So the Mad Hatter would throw his hats, his hat creations out the window of the palace, and people would catch his hats, and people would like just wait there for his hats to be thrown out the window because everybody wanted one of his hats. So I thought that was a really interesting depiction of like the Mad Hatter. So in that regard, I thought it was pretty cool. I thought the world was pretty cool, but that was like the only thing that I kind of liked about this book. So 2 stars, not a fan. Okay, so the next book was This Is How I Disappear. This is a graphic novel by Marion Malley. So this is a book about depression. And I picked this book up totally on a whim. It was at the library. I brought it home, read it right away, and I have to say, this was a 5-star read. This was so good. So if you struggle with any like mental health issues, depression, anything like that, I highly recommend reading this because this was so well done. So I never have been someone that has experienced like really dark clinical depression. I've had anxieties, I've had, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder, I've had different types of mental illness, but I've never dealt with like real, true clinical depression. And I feel like this book is probably the best depiction of what it's like to be depressed that I've ever read, because it just helped me understand what depression kind of looks like in a way. And I think this book really showed the slow descent into depression and how it's so easy to write it off and be like, oh no, I'm fine. Like, I'm fine. It's not that big of a deal. And so like you go out with your friends and you feel really happy for that time when you're with your friends and you go out with them, you go to dinner, or you know, go party and stuff. And then the second that you get home, you're like sad again and you're depressed and you're like, oh, but I'm fine though, because I was feeling fine a couple hours ago. I'm just feeling sad right now. Like, I'm not that bad. I'm not that depressed. Or you have like really passing thoughts about like, sometimes I just think it would be easier not to exist. But you're like, that's not like a suicidal thought or anything. Like, I'm just saying it would be easier not to exist. Like, I'm not that bad. I'm not that bad. And you always kind of write it off as not being that bad. Like, you don't need help. But in reality, you're struggling and you're just kind of like pushing through. And every day is like not the best, but not the worst. But then like sometimes you'll have like these moments where you're just really sad. But then the next day you see your friends and you're like, see, I'm feeling fine now. And it's just like that constant feeling of trying to justify your feelings. Like, no, I'm fine. There's people that are worse than me. And kind of always pushing off therapy, pushing off help. And this book shows you how you slowly just disappear. And then you finally come to terms with the fact that you're like, oh, maybe I actually do need help. And I've just been like pushing this off for so long. And I feel like this is such a good book for that. Like, it was so well done. And I feel like so many people are going to be able to relate to this in a way. Like, I honestly could see this being one of the best books that I will read in 2022, and I read it in January. It's just such a good, well done book. I highly recommend this for anybody, even if you've never been depressed or if you have been depressed. This is a must read. I feel like it's so good. So the next book that I read was a book from my top 10 books I want to read in 2022, An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. So this book was actually interesting to me because I wasn't expecting what it was really, and I feel like this book is one of those books where I know that it wasn't for me, but that was like the only reason I wasn't like obsessed with it, because I feel like this is one of those books that's really well done. Like, it's super good, but you just have to be the right person. Like, you have to like this type of book to like really appreciate it, if you know what I mean. So this book is all politics. I am not a political person. Like, I don't like books that are really heavy in politics and ties and allies, and this person is connected to this person, and this person is this person's son, and then he doesn't like this person because of this reason, but then he's allied with this person who doesn't like this person who's trying to get back at this person. Like, it's a lot of that kind of thing. And I'm not a huge fan of that because I get confused extremely easy. I can do it if there's other side plot lines, but this book is written for people that love political intrigue and political drama and stuff like that. So if you are into that, you are going to love this, because this is what this book is written for, literally. So this is about like a magical world, and it's kind of like sitting inside of the real world, right? Like, we have our real world, our real politics, but this magical world is kind of like its own little world inside the real world, and it has like the hierarchy. Now, the hierarchy gets changed out every like 15 years, and there's a leader of this magical world, and every 15 years there's this competition, and whoever wins this competition gets to be the leader of the magical world. Now, each house in this magical world has to hire on a champion, and this champion is the person that competes to, you know, make their house the leader. Now, the thing is like, this book isn't action-packed. Like, you don't focus on the championships. You don't focus on the competition. Like, the competitions literally take up like 2 paragraphs. Like, it'll be like a competition between 2 houses, and it's literally like a 2-paragraph thing, and then it gets back to the politics. Like, the author did not write this for action. So if you really, really like that, I highly recommend it. I gave it 3 stars, but it's a very subjective 3 stars because objectively I know that this is a good book. It just, I don't think was necessarily for my taste, if that makes sense. So just know that going in, not my taste, but it definitely could be your taste. So the next book that I read was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is a thriller novel, and I heard so many good things about this book. I was actually really excited to read this. And I read this via audiobook, and I started it around Christmas time and I was like wrapping presents, and I just didn't really like this book very much. Now, I am definitely an unpopular opinion, but this book was very like crime-based, murder-based. There was a lot of characters, and it took me a really long time to get through this book. Like, I just never felt like I wanted to listen to it. I kept forgetting who the characters were. I would go like huge chunks of time without listening to this, and then I would forget who this character was and who this character was, and it was a past-present timeline. So there was one group of characters from the past and then another group of characters in the future, and they were both kind of trying to figure out the same murders, sort of, except for the current timeline was trying to figure out the murder of the person in the past timeline, and it was just going back and forth between the 2 timelines, and I do not like that. Like, I get so taken out of a story when there's too much back and forth in timelines. This is definitely not one of those books that you can take breaks from. Like, you need to read this book, I think, fairly quickly without like huge chunks in between each reading session, because I was just like, I don't even know what's going on. I think I finished it just because I knew like the basis of the story, but I gave this book 3 stars as well. I just wasn't that happy with it. And I don't think I'm that big of a fan of like true crime. Okay, I take that back. I like true crime. I don't like fake crime. Like, I don't like stories that are like true crime, but like fictional true crime, where it's like you're trying to figure out like a murder mystery type of thing, and there's like all these characters, and there's like police officers and like detectives and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not my favorite thing in the world, and this definitely fits into that genre, right? What is that called? I wasn't super happy with the ending. Like, the ending was okay, but it wasn't like that great. I don't know. I just didn't think this book like lived up to the hype for me personally, but you definitely might feel different because I know a lot of people felt like it was really, really good. So just know going in that it is time hoppy. But the interesting thing about this audiobook was the past narrator was different than the current time narrator. So if you like jumped back into the story, you knew who you were reading from because the narrator was different. So I highly appreciate that, but this just wasn't my favorite. I don't know why. I was really hoping I would like it, but I just didn't really like it that much. Okay, so the next book was The Fine Print. This is by Lauren Asher, and this is part of the Dreamland Billionaires series. Now, this book was, I'm torn on this, okay? I feel like I kind of need to like start rating romance novels differently than I rate other novels, because here's the issue. I love romance. I just like it. And so it's sometimes really hard for me to like step away from the romance because I just think romance is cute. And like, it doesn't matter like what the romance is. I just like it. So I tend to like romances much more easy than I like other genres because I just think romance is cute. And so sometimes I feel like I need to like rate them slightly differently, or I need to be a little bit harder on them, if that makes sense. And I feel like this book was cute for what it was, for a romance. It was a romance and it was cute in that way. And the thing that I really liked the most about this was it's like a fake Disneyland. It's basically Disneyland, but like the like fake non-copyrighted version of Disneyland. So it's basically like the grandson of like Walt Disney, or the creator of Disneyland, and he has to become the director because his grandpa dies, and so he has to be the director of Disneyland for like a couple of months to gain his inheritance. He basically has to sell his ideas to the board, and if the board accepts his changes that he wants to do for Dreamland to make Dreamland a better place, if the board accepts his kind of vision, then he gets his inheritance. If they decline it, then he doesn't get his inheritance. So he has to find a way to like better Dreamland and make it a better place. And he has to try to sell it to the board. But the thing is he doesn't want anything to do with Dreamland. He just wants to get his inheritance and leave and like go start his own business. But the thing is he hires the main character, and she becomes a creator, which is basically like an Imagineer. Like, remember Disney Imagineers? And so she basically is like the creative person behind Dreamland. And she works alongside a bunch of other creators, and he hires her because she has like good vision. He thinks that she'll be able to like be creative enough to come up with a good enough vision for him to sell his ideas so he can get his inheritance. But obviously they fall in love. Now, the thing about this book, and the thing I liked about it, is I'm a Disney person. I am a Disney adult, and it's just a fact. I love Disneyland more than anything, and I think that's one of the reasons why I liked this book as much as I did, is because I love Disneyland. I just like Disneyland, and the whole time I was reading this, I was just thinking about Disneyland, and it was a cute romance. So Disneyland and romance, like, sign me up, right? So I could have easily given this book 4 stars if I wanted to, but this book was so cringy. The dialogue was so cringy. Like, the entire time I was reading this book, I'm like, why? Nobody would ever say that. Nobody would ever do that. Like, that conversation would not go that way. Like, why is she talking to this person like that? Like, you would never talk to a person that you just met like that. Like, it makes no sense. Like, the entire time I felt like it was so unrealistic, like the way that things were going and the way the dialogue was happening and the way conversations were happening. I'm like, that would never happen. Like, that's not how you talk to people. You know what I'm saying? I also feel like this book was like so over dramatized and like overly dramatic. Like, you know, when you're watching like old Disney shows, like Lizzie McGuire is like the perfect example. Like, you know how in those types of shows, like everything is over dramatized. Like Lizzie McGuire will like walk into a locker and then she'll like fall on her back and she's like, oh. Like, that's what this whole entire book feels like. Like, everything is an over dramatized version of reality type of thing. And I feel like I was reading a show like that to a certain degree. And it was just so cliche. Like, I felt like this book was the most cliche romance ever. It was like the basic hate to love, the basic enemies to lovers, a super basic plot line. And this book was like 420 pages or something, 430 pages. This book did not need to be 430 freaking pages. Like, this was like the most basic like romance plot line in the world. And I just felt like it was like, why is this so long? Like, it doesn't need to be this long. And this is also one of those books that I didn't feel like did the enemies to lovers really well. And one thing I started to notice, as I talked about in like earlier in this video, is I like enemies to lovers and I like hate to love, but not always. And I feel like sometimes I get really, really tired of that trope, especially when it's not done well. Like, if the main love interest is just a jerk for literally no reason, like there's no reason for why he's doing what he's doing, or he's just kind of like a butt, but he has no reason to be, he's just kind of a butt, and then all of a sudden he falls in love with the main character, and then he's like nice to her now because he's like falling in love with her. It's like, why? Like, I just don't like that. It's irritating to me. And I kind of felt like the main character was like unnecessarily rude and just unnecessarily kind of a grumpy person, and it was like, this is lame. And I also kind of feel like too, the characters were not how they were like being portrayed. Like, she was like, from his eyes, she was like this bubbly, sweet, cute girl that just like pranced around in little dresses and was like, ee, like a little sunshine girl. But then when you read from her perspective, she was not like that at all. I felt like she was like this snarky little like tomboy that was just like sarcastic all the time. Like, it was like the two characters that were being portrayed were like not matching up. And I don't know, I'm not too sure how much I like her as an author. I feel like there could definitely be improvements in her writing style, and it's just kind of a cliche writing style to me. But you matter, I wanted to say, but the words got trapped in my throat, held down by this worry that something isn't right between us. Oh, I hate that when it's like something, they want to say something but it's stuck in their throat and they can't get the words out, and it's like, the ending was cute. The ending was cute. I have to admit, like, the ending, I was like, oh, it's so cute. You can try it. I just wouldn't say it's like the best romance ever written, if you know what I'm saying. It's very, very basic. So the next book that I picked up was Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. And these are actually my niece's graphic novels, and I've been wanting to read these forever, but they're always checked out of my library, and my niece actually has all 3 of them, and I was like, I need to borrow those. So she let me borrow them. These are freaking adorable. Oh my gosh. I'm reading the second one right now. I'm about halfway through, and these are so endearing. Like, I can't explain it. Like, there's something just very like realistic about these, and there's something just very like endearing about them. Like, I totally understand the hype on these now because they're just so cute. It's basically just about these 2 boys that meet and they fall in love. That's basically the synopsis. But the thing is one of the boys is already out as gay. He's already out, everyone knows that he's gay. He's already gone through that process of coming out and kind of being bullied by people, but then people slowly like accepting him, and this rugby player starts to have feelings for him, and they kind of end up falling in love, but the rugby player has never had feelings for a guy before, so it's kind of like his like journey into discovering who he is as a person and like what that means. And then the guy who was already gay kind of helping him through the process and like being supportive of him and understanding of him, and it's just kind of like their dynamic, and it's so cute. And I'm telling you guys, like, you have to read these. Like, there is a hype on these for a reason, and if you're looking for something that is just endearing and sweet and you kind of want to peek inside what it's like to kind of come out as gay, or kind of what the journey is like to kind of discover that part of you, I think that this is a really good little graphic novel series to read, because I think it's really realistic, and she definitely touches on kind of like that process and that self-discovery, and I think it's a really, really cool way of doing it, and she does a really good job at it as well. So these are so cute. I cannot wait to finish the series. I just think it's adorable. Okay, next up is the last book, and it is Ruth Ware, Turn of the Key. So this book is the book I just finished, and it's a thriller, and I've never read a Ruth Ware book before. This was my first Ruth Ware, and I liked this book. Like, this book was really, really good, and it was very mysterious. Like, I didn't know where this book was going by the end. I was like, I have no idea, like, how this is gonna wrap up, like, what the twist is going to be, and what that moment's going to be, you know, where everything kind of comes together. I couldn't predict this. It was one of those books where it could go in so many different ways. And so I feel like the end was, like, really cool to kind of see everything wrap up and, like, come together, and, like, how all the pieces fell into place. So this book is about a girl who takes this nannying job for these really rich people in Scotland, and she takes this nannying job, and the house is like really creepy, and weird things are happening in this house, like, and the middle child tells her that there's ghosts, and she starts to think that this house is haunted because really weird things start happening. And the girls that she's like babysitting or nannying, I guess, are kind of weird, especially the middle child. She's like a huge brat, and she's not very nice, and she's really struggling to like nanny these kids, but she's trying her best, but weird things keep happening, and she's literally going crazy. And she finds out like 5 of the previous nannies quit after like a week of working there, and she's like, I can totally see why, like, this house is crazy. And then somebody gets murdered, and she is in prison now for that murder, and she is writing to a lawyer telling him, like, I didn't murder this person, like, you have to believe me. And so she's writing this lawyer, and basically what this book is her letter to the lawyer explaining what happened and like why she isn't the killer. So it's a really good book. I really enjoyed it, and it's definitely like a unexpected, mysterious thriller. The only downside to this book is it's very slow to build. I feel like a lot of this book is like building up to like this ending, but like some of it doesn't feel like it really is necessary for the ending. You know what I'm saying? I feel like Ruth Ware is a very descriptive writer, and I don't feel like description, like heavy description, is needed in thrillers, because thrillers is more about the plot to me. And she would go paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, like talking about like the setting and the landscape and the house and this is what this looked like and this looked like. And I don't like that in thrillers. It drives me nuts, because I don't care about that in thrillers. Like, I can picture what a house looks like. I can picture what Scotland looks like. Like, you don't need to tell me, because I want to just read the plot, you know what I mean? And so I feel like this book got a little bit long. It was a little bit slow to build up to that end, but I feel like it was worth it. I gave this book 4 stars, and yeah, I liked it. If you're looking for something that's a very like mysterious thriller, something that's not easy to predict, because I do know that, you know, thriller lovers, people that read a ton of thrillers, like, can predict thrillers pretty easy because they've read so many. I feel like this one is a little bit harder to predict, so if you're looking for something like that, then you might really like this. But yeah, I do like Ruth Ware. I might try another one of her books. I have The Death of Mrs. Westaway on my shelf. So that is it, you guys. I know that was a lot of books. I know that I talked a lot. There were some of these books that I really wanted to talk more about. Like, some of these books I could talk about for hours, honestly. Like that Whispers in the Roars book, like, I literally want to do like a full-blown discussion on that book. I think it would be really, really fun because it's so interesting, and I'd just be curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on that book. So if you have read Whispers in the Roars, let me know what your thoughts were. I'd be very, very curious. So that is it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was a nice break in your day or night or whatever time it is for you, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.